Hello, my name is Rachel Hunt, and I decided to write a paper about a lecture I attended on the Forest Park Community College campus. And the lecture was called Refugee and Immigrant Experiences, Developing Intercultural Competence in St. Louis. And I was invited to attend this lecture by my professor for my Communication Between Cultures class. And that's a class you have to take. It's mandatory for all health majors. And so I'm going to be getting my nursing degree, and so the class was mandatory for me. But I was really glad that I took it because I did learn a lot of things in this class that I feel are going to be relevant for my nursing career. And I talk about that in my presentation also and in my paper. So yeah, the lecture was put on by the Associate Professor Leila Gouchi, and my professor for my communications class, Dr. Osborne, she also presented, and then there were three other speakers as well who talked about their experiences as foreigners and as refugees and as immigrants here in this country. And it's really interesting. And I also talk later, so I talked in my paper about what they talked about, what the speakers presented about, and I also spoke about how I feel like what they talked about and what I learned about in that class are going to be relevant to my nursing career. Okay, and so when I attended the presentation, I took notes as they were speaking so that I could remember what they spoke about, and I could elaborate on some of the details, and also so I could prompt my own memory when I was writing my paper about that. And so I outlined what I wanted to speak about what topics and how I wanted the topics to connect to each other in my paper. I made a rough outline, and then I wrote my entire paper off of that. And so that was my first draft. And then I had my mother proofread it. She's a teacher, and she has her degree in history, and I had her proofread it and make some corrections and some suggestions, and then I finalized my final draft, and then I submitted that. And so that was the process I used to make it. And so some of the outcomes I chose were under the communication tab: analyze and evaluate own and others' message sending and receiving. And that was relevant to my project because obviously the speakers were sending a message, and then I had to analyze it, and I had to internalize it, and then I had to send my own message and, speaking, relating what they said to me, and, organizing it in a way that highlighted the themes that I wanted to communicate. And so, under the higher order thinking tab, there was the outcome: put elements together to form a coherent or functional whole, reorganize elements into a new pattern or structure. And so, I was really happy that I could structure my paper in a way that made sense to me. And so at first I talked about what the presenters spoke about, and then I talked about how I feel being culturally competent and being open to other cultures is relevant to nursing, and I actually found a nursing book that's a code of ethics, and they actually specifically said you nurses have to be able to speak and communicate with other people from other cultures, and you have to respect their beliefs, and you also have to work with them and to try to communicate with them to better treat them and to make a health plan that makes them happy and healthy. So that's cool. And so then after that, I talked about what I learned in the cultural communication between culture class, and some of the higher concept stuff in that class, and how that has made me really reflect on my own cultural beliefs and my own openness to other people's cultures too. Okay, and so then under the valuing tab, there was the outcome, utilize cultural behavior and historical knowledge to recognize, clarify, and to continue to develop a personal value system. And so that was obviously what I just mentioned, how I've been reflecting throughout this whole semester while taking my communication between cultures class about my own values. And in the class, I also mentioned this in my paper, that there is like a official like system that like people go through, where the first step is where you just like take like your values for granted and you're unexamined. But then the next step is when you are faced with someone else's culture and someone else's values. And so then that like forces you to compare them, and it also asks you, it forces you to ask yourself, why do I believe what I believe, and why do I do what I do? And so then the third and the final step is like accepting of your cultural identity, where you know the answers. This is why I believe what I believe, and this is why I do what I do.